Well, hi folks, it's good to be with you. My name's Paul Maconochie, and I'm with you just today and tomorrow, and it's a real privilege to be here and to be able to share some things with you, and thank you for coming. And I got to know Brian over the last couple of years. He's been to visit me in the church I lead in Sheffield, and also we were on retreat together with Mike Breen, who I think some of you know, in January down in South Carolina. So that's been great. And he heard that I was around this week in the States and asked me if I'd come and pop in and spend some time with you guys. So it's a huge privilege. So thanks for having me. Some of you were. Just to get some idea of how many of you were here, could you just show me if you were here at the last session? So, okay, so about half of us. Okay, so I won't do too much of an introduction. For those of you that weren't here, I lead the church in Sheffield, UK, that Mike Breen, he was the pastor before me, and he trained and raised me up, and then he came over here and I took over leading the church there. And we're in a very different situation to being in the Midwest here. We're in a setting that you really would describe as post-Christendom. It's about 2.5% church attendance on a Sunday in Sheffield. At Christmas, it's just under 5%. So at Christmas, over 95% of the population are not in church of the city, and therefore we've had to innovate really and come up with some different ways of engaging in church and so on. And basically, what we've done is we've begun to learn how to do the kind of way of operating that missionaries use, but in our home nation, rather than going off elsewhere. And so we've particularly focused around the home and around having an integrated life, and around having a life that doesn't just get pulled in lots of different directions, but where really your life and your mission are the same thing. And so I think the experience of the average member of our church would be very different, I think. Maybe it's changing here over time, but it still, I think, would be very different from the average life, to be honest, to the life of the average Christian in pretty much any mega church in the US. It seems to me like if you're a good, faithful Christian going to a growing, kind of successful, if you like, church, you're usually a pretty busy person over here, and you're probably doing a lot of, by the time you've done whatever it is, your Bible study group, and you're being part of helping with the youth program, and your church on Sunday, and then you've got this other thing that you help with, and you help with this kind of mercy ministry, and you do whatever it is, and you do all these things, and of course that's on top of trying to look after your kids and raise them in a culture that expects that to be very activity orientated as well. So if you've got kids, your kids have got to be doing, multiple sports probably, and whatever else, drama and their academic studies. And so when you're not doing a church program, then you're probably driving your kids in a car to something. And as a Brit, I've got to say, it does all look a bit exhausting. Yeah. So we have had an element of that kind of stuff, but the big focus for us, the big thing that we've felt that God's been focusing on with us has been about learning how to identify as a family, say if you're a family, or as a person, or as a group of friends, or whatever it is, whatever the lifestyle is that you've got, learning to identify what Jesus' calling to you is. And doing that, rather than, Paul tells us that we're to take hold of that for which Christ has taken hold of us. Yeah? And my observation is that a lot of us have been so busy taking hold of that for which the church have taken hold of us, that we can no longer take hold of that for which Christ has taken hold of us. They're not the same thing, necessarily. Yeah? And for us, this is a pastoral seminar. So one of the big questions to me pastorally of our people is, are we providing a culture and the right supporting structures so that our people can take hold of that for which Christ has taken hold of them. Yeah? Rather than people trying to be good Christians by taking hold of that for which the church has taken hold of them. And that's, as I just said, that's often a different thing. So that's some of the stuff that is kind of there behind what's going on for us. And we've made some quite radical changes. So a lot of our folks in Sheffield do their... I know that you guys have some missional communities in the church. Well, that's our main way of operating. Those kind of mid-sized groups led by everyday men and women in the church. And most of those groups come in, they do that instead of church on Sundays most weeks. And then at least once a month, minimum of once a month, they come in and do church with everybody else. So we basically say to our guys, what we actually say is, everybody needs to be out on a Sunday with your missional community at least once a month, and everybody needs to be in on a Sunday with your missional community at church with us once a month. And you can choose between those 2 points how many times you do it. But honestly, once the missional community thing starts to really work for them, a lot of our guys choose to be out 3 weeks out of 4. And let me give you an example of how that works. So there's one group. Sheffield is not a very attractive city. It was bombed massively in the war and then rebuilt in the 50s and 60s when there was no money. But everything was built out of concrete blocks, you know. It was a steel city. I think the best idea, for those of you that weren't here earlier, the best sense of Sheffield I can give you is kind of the kind of historical heritage of a place like Pittsburgh, but with the weather of somewhere like Seattle, you know. So it's not a tourist destination, let's put it like that. One big advantage that we have is that we're on the edge of a huge national park called the Peak District, and it's beautiful. I mean, the weather is not great in it. If you get a nice day, it's breathtaking though, and you know, it's small mountains and valleys and lakes, and it's just lovely. And so with that national park, the thing for us is, you know, you've got very low church attendance on a Sunday, and so in the summer months, pretty much half the population of Sheffield, particularly any families, are all in the national park. And the few remaining Christians are all in church. You know, and for us, as we're trying to take on this sense of being missionaries, there was one group particularly that began to find that difference a little bit frustrating. They also happen to be outward bound type people, you know, outdoor people. So I guess they kind of wanted to be in the national park too. So they came up with this idea for missional community that they called Activate. And the way that Activate worked, it's just a mid-sized group, so it's not a huge number of people, about 20 adults, maybe 22 adults, something like that, and then kids as well. And maybe slightly more than that, but that kind of number. And then what they did was, the Christians met at about 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, and they'd have kind of a breakfast together, and then they would have an informal time of sharing where the person leading the group would probably say something along the lines of, this week this happened to me, it made me think about this scripture, this is what I thought, what does anyone else think? Yeah, so it's a kind of quite a synagogue-y kind of way. It's certainly not the chapel style. It's not a highly educated person kind of doing a lecture. It's an engagement over scripture. And then they'd pray for each other, and they'd also pray for their non-Christian friends, and they do that together. And then, say about 10:30 or 10:45, they go and meet at a pre-arranged location in the national park, and that's the wider group. And there's probably about there's 22, 23 Christian adults. There's probably about another 10 to 15 other adults who are not Christians yet, who have been friends of those people and been invited to do this, and they join with them. These guys know that it's kind of connected with the church, this group, but they also know from experience they're not going to get, you know, they're not going to try and be forcibly converted or anything, and they just have a good time. So, yeah. So these guys, they all meet up, and there's teenagers there and kids as well, and they break into 3 kind of smaller groups, who do different activities. So this particular missional community, Activate, has a group that likes to do rock climbing, They're really into that. That's really big in Sheffield because of this national park. We've got lots of rock climbers. There's a group that goes walking, goes hiking, and there's a group that does water sport type stuff. And so some of the families actually, different, members of the family go into different groups. So like the mum and dad might be in the walking group and the teenage son might be in the water sports group and whatever. And then they basically just all meet. They all go off and do that for a couple of hours, have fun, do their stuff. And then they all meet back for a late lunch, say 1:30 or 2 o'clock, a late lunch. And if it's a nice day, if it's nice weather, they'll maybe have it as a picnic. If it's not nice, they'll go to a little cafe or restaurant somewhere in the Peak District and have lunch together. And then they all go home. And they do that 3 Sundays out of 4. And they have some rules that go on during that time for the Christians. And one of the rules is no one's to talk about church. And the other rule is you should talk about what Jesus is doing in your life as much as if it was only Christians there. Because what they say is if you're not doing that, then you're not being true to yourself. You're not being honest. Yeah, because Jesus is doing tons in your life. You're a Christian. You're excited about it. If you're not talking about that, then that's not fair on the people who are there who don't know Jesus because they're not getting to know the real you. Yeah, so they do that. And they'll do other things spontaneously, like they will pray for each other if they're not well and things like that. And people who aren't Christians might get prayed for, might not. It's fine. It's not a high-pressure environment. But what they found was, as they did that people really, really began to get interested. People who came and did the walking and did the activities. And over a period of a year, this is a group of about 20 to 20, maybe 25 Christians. Over a period of a year, this group brought, I think, 8 people to faith. Now, if you think about that in terms of the dynamics of the whole church, that's huge. That's a huge number. If that happened across all the groups, we would be absolutely in trouble. Yeah? And what they did was, on the one Sunday when they came in, we have this thing, when the groups go out, when they come back in, we say, you're not guests, you're like the grown-up kids coming back to their parents' house. When you come, you kind of join in and help us do stuff. So they'd come back and they said, well, we'll come in on one Sunday a month, but when we do, can we be the welcome team? And I said, well, why do you want to be the welcome team? They said, well, we might have guys coming who don't know the Lord yet, and we'd like their first experience of church ever to be that they're standing on the doors, inviting, welcoming everyone else in. We think that would be helpful. So we said, I don't think it does any harm. As long as they're not going to spit at anybody, I think that's fine. And so, and so they did that, and they saw this amazing thing happen. And the weird thing was, these guys are just having a fantastic time. They're being really effective as Christians. They're bringing people to faith. And none of them are really involved in any of the programs that we run. Do you know what I mean? And they've got teenagers and children and parents joining in together. They're enjoying it. There's discipleship going on. And what they do is, if somebody begins to get interested, there's a number of options. They'll say, when they get to the point where they think they need to invite them in more, they'd say, well, did you know that some of us who follow Jesus actually meet for breakfast first? You're welcome to come and join us if you want. Or they say, well, we're not here on the 4th Sunday of the month. That's because we go into church. Why don't you come and join? Do you see what I mean? So there's this. So what they do is they have these graduated kind of these ways in that they can gradually invite people into. So they're very intentional about it. But they're also very careful about some of the things I've seen you guys do. They don't use different language when they're together, just as Christians, as the language that they use when there aren't people there who aren't Christians. They're really careful that they've got a high value on integrity. It's like, let's be real about this. So what they would use a biblical term, I think, that Jesus used in Luke 10 for people who don't yet know Jesus, but who are seeking and inquiring and hanging out with Christians, and they'd call them people of peace. Because, Jesus said if there's a person of peace there. And the thing is that they don't call them that just behind their back. They call them that to their faces too. Yeah? So they talk about something and say, that you're a Christian, he's a Christian because he's following Jesus, and you're a person of peace because you haven't made that decision, but you're, clearly you're hanging out with us, and the Bible calls you a person of peace. And it's not like a denigratory kind of term like a pre-Christian or a non-Christian. It's like an honouring term, isn't it? And that's only because we're using the term that Jesus uses. Jesus tends to use honouring terms about people, doesn't he, rather than... So I just wanted to give you that just to start us off as an outline of that, as a background, because if we think about pastoral care in terms of I'm sure you guys are brilliant at pastoral care. I'm not trying to tell you how to do it. I think my brief is to tell you how we do it, and then you can reflect on that in the light of what you guys did. It might be helpful, it might not be. Please receive this. That's the spirit in which I'm just giving it. It's just another example of something that's going on in another church. But to us, that's some of the context. And I think it's important to have said that, because when people's Christian lives are, don't get me wrong, that's a fairly full-on example. There are lots of examples that aren't as sorted as that aren't as outside the church as that. But when people's Christian lives are operating like that, I think it does make quite a big difference to the level of pastoral care that they need. I think when you have a church system which operates by having a relatively small portion of the church doing such a huge amount of the stuff that they're just totally exhausted, I think it actually creates pastoral care issues. Yeah, so sometimes you can just throw more people at that and throw more pastoral time at that, so then you've got more people who are getting exhausted looking after the exhausted people. You can do that, but I think there is also room sometimes in a church saying, are there some systemic things that actually don't help us to have good lifestyles? And there's a few signs of health. There's lots of signs of not being healthy in our church, as there are in any church, but there's a few interesting signs of health, I think. One of them is, we're not anything like as big a church as you guys, but by UK standards we're big. Churches in the UK are way smaller than in the US. We're about 2,700 adults, something like that. So that makes us probably the largest mainstream church outside of London. So in the UK terms, we're a big church. I know that you guys are way bigger, but you've got to put that in the context of 2.5% church attendance, if that makes sense. But in a church that size, as far as I'm aware, I might have missed some people, I might be slightly wrong here, but as a ballpark figure, it's going to be kind of right. In 10 years, I think we've had 6 divorces. Yeah? And just to put that into context, the divorce rate in the church in the UK is the same as the divorce rate outside the church, about 40 to 45% in the UK. Yeah? So there's something there to do with a kind of systemic way of operating, which is helping people, isn't it? Yeah? And I want to just think about some of those things and kind of dig in there, if that's okay. So we'll go into that. Just anybody just wanted any kind of comments or questions before we'll get into that divorce thing and why I think that hasn't happened much in our church. But anyone just want to pick any of that stuff up before we move on?
How do you say there's about 2% in church?
Yeah, 2.5 maybe.
Roughly the percentage that you all are touching through your ministries?
That I don't know. When we count, we don't count kind of butts on seats on a Sunday. Our counting system is that we count through our communities. So what we count is committed regular members of missional communities, where people are overtly being discipled in following Jesus. So we have other groups like, mum and toddler groups and community groups and things like that, but we don't count those people because we count disciples. So when I say 2,700, that's 2,700 people who are regular committed members of missional communities, who are proper disciples. Those guys, they're going to be touching at least one other life, let alone, a lot of them will be touching quite a lot. If all the groups were like that community I just talked about, then you'd probably be talking at least that number again, but who knows? Yeah. But I'd say that if you look at the area directly, the kind of residential area directly around the church that we planted out of, which follows all the same principles, St. Thomas's Crooks. So that was the original church we planted out of it. We've become another church. We're kind of partners with them, we're a separate church. Because they're a parish church, that means they have council kind of statistics. And Sheffield as a whole is 2.5%. In the parish of Crooks, it's 13% church attendance. So, I mean, that is actually quite a significant impact on their local area, which you'd see, for example, in schools. So if you send your kid to a state school in the UK, in the average state school, honestly, I mean, well, my experience when I went to school, and this is, I mean, there was more church attendance then, that's, you know, quite a long time ago. I was the only Christian in my year. There was no Christian in the year above. There was no other Christian in the year below. My daughter going to a school that's close to where the church is probably has 3 or 4 Christians in her year and several in the year above and below. So it's not a huge shift, but, you know, as you get around into the areas around the church, it has created a kind of mini subculture. But yeah, we've got a long, long way to go. We haven't got our city changed yet. Sheffield's a city of 600,000 people, so it's quite a big city. Anyone else? Any other questions or thoughts?
Were you going to touch on any other signs of health before you dive into the divorce thing more? Or it almost sounded
Yeah.
like you were going to kind of rattle off, like, hey, we see these signs of health. I'm just curious.
I think what I want to do is, I think there are some other signs of health, but I think I'll give them to you in a kind of wider context, if that's okay. Because I think I want to dig into what's the system, and then you'll see how it works, if that's okay. But as a kind of just a heads up, I think the other main sign of health for me would be that we have very little. I mean, our actual staff, kind of purpose-focused pastoral team at the moment, so in terms of actual employees running pastoral care, at the moment at our church is 0. We're kind of in between a role. We are going to put somebody in who's going to be paid 2 days a week to oversee pastoral care. Now, to me, that is a sign of health, because what it's a sign of is we've created a culture where people look after each other rather than a dependent culture where they're looking for a central church to look after them, if that makes sense. So I think that's a sign of health. There would be churches that say, that's a sign you're not healthy because you're not looking after people. And let me put that in perspective. It's not that there aren't pastoral ministries. So we have some prayer ministries, we have a bereavement ministry and so on. We have certain ministries. They're all run by volunteers, those, though. They're not run by people who are paid. So I think there's a self-sustaining thing that's going on for us. Okay. So for those of you that weren't around this morning, just to give you the background, we operate around this triangle thing, which some of you will have seen before. And the triangle for us is just an articulation of the Great Commandment, the Great Commission. So love God with all your heart, love your neighbour as yourself, go and make disciples. Yeah, and it's like the Christian life summarised, isn't it? It's like, it's that classic thing, isn't it, where we like to make the gospel complicated and easy, and actually it's simple and hard. Yeah. You don't have to be a theologian to understand it. It's just you have to be a disciple to actually do it. That's the problem. So we show that as our kind of up and out triangle. Hopefully this will work. Oh, there you go. So love God, love your neighbour, make disciples. And if I was going to kind of share with you the cultural shift that we've been going on, I think it would be this. So I wouldn't say that what I've just shown you is any different from what I see here. You guys do those things as well. I mean, we use the triangle as an audit tool because our basic understanding is most of us do 2 out of the 3. Yeah, most of us default to 2 out of the 3 of those things. And actually most church traditions do. If you're from, say, the social liberal church tradition, you tend to do in, community, well. You tend to do out, well, mercy ministries. You just forget it's all about God. Yeah, don't you forget the up, yeah? Our tradition that I come from, which is an evangelical tradition, which in the UK is slightly different from evangelical in the US in that it's Bible-believing, but it's generally in the UK tends to be what we call renewed. So they tend to be, gifts of the Spirit tend to be much more normally practiced in the UK, but without the kind of wackiness that you sometimes get in the US. It's just a slightly different. I think there's been so much wackiness in the US, it's kind of put the other Bible-believing Christians off it a bit. Do you know what I mean? Whereas that hasn't really happened in the UK, so it's just kind of normal that you'd expect, you know, to pray for someone to get healed if they were sick and really believe that they might be, and that you'd expect God might actually talk to you prophetically and all that kind of stuff. but it's kind of done I think by American standards, done in a very low-key way, which I think makes it easier for folks to engage with. So that's our tradition. Now, in that tradition, we tend to do up. We tend to be really into worship. Let's worship God. And we tend to be into in. Let's do community. We're just frightened of doing out. I mean, it's holy huddle if you're not careful. So we have to keep reminding ourselves that it's actually about reaching the last, the least, and the lost, and it's not just about us having a great time with the Lord together. But each different tradition has different strengths and weaknesses, don't they? And so we use that triangle just to remind ourselves we've got to keep doing all three. But this is my picture of the attractional church, and this is slightly caricature. So I'm not saying that I'm not thinking of a particular church here. This is kind of big picture stuff, but this would be the kind of picture of it, where on the left here. Sorry, I've gone too far there. Where the white shell there, that's the staff and the key volunteers. And the social contract, there's a social contract that goes on, whether it's spoken out loud or not. And the social contract is this. We, as the people of the church, pay you as the staff or give you authority as key volunteers. And in return, we expect you to look after us and to feed us. Yeah, that's the social contract. We'll pay you or give you authority, you look after us and feed us. Yeah? And so effectively what happens is that the staff and the key volunteers start to operate almost like a shell around the church, protecting them. And they're looking inwards, trying to look after everybody. It's a provider-client model, isn't it? Yeah? In the missional movement type model for a church, the staff and the key volunteers are at the centre, but the contract is different. There's always a social contract. The contract's different. It's we pay you or we give you authority to resource, equip and train us as we look after each other and try and reach the last, the least and the lost. Yeah? So the folks in the first church would never say this out loud. I'm trying to say what's going on in terms of what they say in their hearts, if they're really honest. Might be something like this. I can make it work. Yes. We want to be looked after and fed by God's word while we try to be good people in a bad world. Yeah? Now, nobody's just say that out loud, but, if we're honest. So what's your job? Your job is to look after me, pastoral care, and to feed me, teaching. Yeah? And my job is to try and be a good Christian in a bad world and to turn up on a Sunday and to pay my tithe so that you can, build your next building or do your next mercy mission, which are important things. Yeah? The missional movement, honestly, people who are in this say we want to love God and each other and lay our lives down to reach the last, the least and the lost. Yeah, different mentality, isn't it? And we want you to help us to do it. That's what they'd say to you guys, to the pastoral team, to the staff team. They'd be saying, we want to do this and we want you to help us to do this. And to do this, we need the right structures to support us. We need the right training and equipping so that we know how to do it. Yeah? I'd say what it comes down to, and if you're struggling to get this stuff down as I go through, by the way, I'll leave the PowerPoint here, so I'm sure guys can get it printed out for you or whatever. This is slightly tricky, this thing. So the attractional church, I would say, has an interventionist approach. And I think that's towards God and it's towards mission and towards others. And the interventional approach is this. Again, this is stuff no one would ever say, but if they're honest in their heart of hearts, okay? I love God. I find God exciting. I want God to help me and to bless my family. Yeah? You might say that bit out loud. But the silent bit is, but honestly, God's a bit scary. So I'd rather he kept his distance and did it from a distance, please. Yeah? Now, no one says that, but what we do is we behave that way because we get a pastor and we put the pastor between us and God. Yeah? And we say, Pastor, we're going to pay you. Could you go to God, find out what God wants to say to us, and tell us on a Sunday, please? Yeah? Which is interesting because that model is in the Bible. That model is in the Bible. The problem is it's in the Old Testament. It's the way that Moses operated. Yeah? Everybody else stays at the bottom of the mountain. Moses goes up, finds out what God says, comes back, speaks to everybody. It's the Moses model. I would suggest to you it's not the Jesus model. Yeah? And equally, the intervention approach is the one that we approach to others as well. So we see people who are broken, hurting, lost, whatever it is, poor. We're Christians, of course we want to help them. We've got the Holy Spirit living in us. We feel compassion, we want to help, yeah? But honestly, they're a bit scary. So let's help from a distance. And you can help from a distance in so many ways. You can help from a distance by paying someone else to help them. There you are. That helps them, doesn't it? I've helped them, and I haven't had to touch them. Bonus. Yeah. Or even with some of the ministries that we do, which is like, and don't get me wrong on these things. These things I'm saying are not bad things, they're good things. Yeah? Because the way that I think within the West we've all been raised, the choice hasn't been between this and the other thing I'm going to say next. It's between this or doing nothing. So, I mean, if it's like do nothing or pay someone to help people, that's way better. Yeah? So I don't think this is about looking down on the stuff we've been doing. It's about going on with the Lord, isn't it? Going on to the next level. But the other thing would be something like a mercy mission. You know, we run these and we've done them for years. You go on a Thursday night down to where a lot of guys are down and out on the street, and you do a soup run and you give them soup and blankets and you chat to them for an hour, and then you get back in your car and go to your nice, warm, comfortable house. Yeah? It's a good thing to do, but I'm not convinced that it's God's preference. Yeah, I think he'd rather you do that and do nothing, but I think there's an alternative to intervention, which is incarnation. And I think incarnation is life on life. And I think it's God's preference. Why? Because it's what he does. That's why I think it's his preference. I mean, it says, doesn't it, in John 1:14, this is the Message version, the word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Yeah, that is not Jesus taking an intervention approach. It's Jesus taking an incarnation approach. So he doesn't want to bless you from a distance. He wants to move into your life, lock, stock and barrel. He wants to be completely in your life. And he doesn't want you to just try and touch other people's lives from a distance. He wants you to find a way to do life on life with them. Yeah? And that's true. Like the life on life bit is true of outreach, and it's true of each other. So the interventional approach inside a church to pastoral care is, if you have a problem, we have a pastoral team who are paid to help you. Let us refer you to them. Yeah, please, go and get some help. Yeah, the incarnational approach is, let's live life on life and help you to get healed up yourself. My wife Ellie and I, got to know, we ran one of the early missional communities back in the 90s. And we had a bit of a rocky start. We ran one of the worship teams. And at the time, it was quite presentational. It was high quality. We practiced we weren't a professional worship team. I mean, you know, we were all volunteers. But you had to be quite a high standard musically. My wife has a music degree. We had a music professor on that worship team. And we had some professional and semi-professional musicians. We'd meet on a Thursday night. We'd practice for 3 hours for the following Sunday. It was a team of 30. We had a worship team of 30. They didn't all play every week. But it meant that we could cover all sorts of stuff. We had different styles and so on. And we had a chamber group that we could use at Christmas. And we had it was just all sorts of stuff. And a more funky guys and a more of a standard kind of rock worship guys. And we were doing all that. And then Mike Breen started talking about these missional community things. And we felt, wow, we'd really like to do that. And so we met with our worship team and we said, we've got a plan, guys, and that's this. We'll still practice, but we're going to practice for an hour, not for 3 hours. And we're not all going to practice, just the guys that are playing on the Sunday. And with the time that we get back, we're just going to all meet together on a Thursday night. And we're going to eat together and hang out. And we're going to start trying to reach out to people. And we're going to have a really low bar mission, because we knew we were all really bad at mission. And the low bar was welcome the stranger. And actually we said, we're even going to just start, we're going to make it really easy. We're going to start in the sanctuary on a Sunday. So yes, there's a welcome team, but our mission is going to be, there's not going to be one person who comes for the first time to our church who goes away without one of us welcoming them, and not just being friendly to them, but inviting them to come and join us on the Thursday and hang out with us. And so, you know, and we thought that was a good idea. You know, unfortunately the worship team didn't. And we asked them to tell us what they were going to do the following week, and of the 30 people, 27 left in 1 week. Which was a disaster, obviously, for the worship. And the following, fortunately, my wife plays keyboard and I play guitar, so you can do quite a lot with that combo, can't you? The other person, unfortunately, plays the oboe. So we had quite a lot of oboe solos for a little while. And we went to Mike Breen and we just said, we're really sorry, we've totally wrecked your worship team. And he was great because he said, no, you haven't. He said, you guys actually have listened to what I'm preaching and you're really trying to put it into action. And he said, you just press on and see what happens. And I tell you what, let me come and just mentor you a bit and help you guys to do this thing. And we just pressed in, and gradually people started to join who actually had the vision. And some of them were musicians, and the worship team grew again. And honestly, the quality of the music, of the worship, the quality of the music in the worship in our church has never, ever been as good as it was back in those days. It just isn't as good nowadays. But I think the quality of the worship went up. It's weird. It became less people watching a presentation and much more interactive. Because the worship team weren't as reliant when they stood up on a Sunday of the brilliant practice they'd done. They were much more reliant on the Lord. You know, there was a different dynamic, and there was much more integrity of what was going on behind that. They were a genuine community who really were reaching out to people, and you know, there was substance behind it. It wasn't just musical skill that was behind what was going on. So over time that improved, and the group grew and so on. It was great, and it multiplied and so on. And I came onto the staff team once that missional community had multiplied 3 times, and we'd seen a number of people come to faith. And Mike said to me, I think you're called to lead church, Paul. And I said, why? He said, because you have been. Yeah? And I became the senior pastor, having started with a small group and then led missional communities and then led several missional communities. Then he asked me to help lead one of our services. And so by the time I became the senior pastor, I'd led every size of church. And that's basically our recruitment technique. That's how we raise the team up. So that by the time they become a senior member of the team, they know what they're talking about because they've done all that stuff. But I'm sorry, I'm digressing a bit. There was a woman back in those days who came and joined that missional community who was very, very broken, very screwed up. She'd had a terrible background, very, very abusive. You know, her father was the father of her children. She had just been repeatedly physically abused, sexually abused, just terrible, just terrible. And she was she suffered from schizophrenia, she suffered from massive depression. She was on medication. She was in and out of the psychiatric hospital. And she came and started being part of this community. And some amazing things happened over that time. And she came to faith, and some good stuff, but still quite broken. Then she met a husband, and we didn't think it was a great sign that she met her husband on the psychiatric wing. She's got married and. Anyway, and then they kind of moved to a different part of the city, and we didn't see them much for a while. And then it was the Lord's providence that a couple of years later they moved into some tenements, literally quarter of a mile from where we are, just round the corner from our house. And so we began to reconnect with them. But when she first came to faith, and this is how the pastoral care stuff works for us. When she first came to faith, we tried to help her, and she got some prayer ministry, and people talked to her, and she was way too screwed up. She really couldn't function, and she was just totally depressed. She could barely. I mean, we had to go and get her to bring her to the community. She wanted us to, but she couldn't get it. She was agoraphobic. She couldn't go outside. I mean, it was And in the end, we just thought, we can't do this. We can't do this like this. So we thought, we've got to have her to live with us. How else are we going to do this? So Ellie and I invited her. We said, look, just come for a few weeks. Come and live with us. Let's see what happens. So she came to live with us for a while. And when she first started to live with us, she would be sitting in a armchair when we left for work early in the morning. We were both teachers in those days, school teachers. And we'd come back in the evening, and she was still sitting in the same armchair. We'd say, have you got up? She said, no, I've just sat here all day. I mean, really depressed. And about a week in, there was a major breakthrough, which is that during the day, that she realised they came to pick up the trash, and she realised that we hadn't put the trash can out. So she actually got off the seat and put it out. And she was really proud of herself that she'd done this thing, and we made a fuss of her for it. Oh, that's really helpful, thank you. And there were some really difficult times, like she used to self-harm massively. And one time we got back from work, and she'd locked herself in our bathroom with all our kitchen knives. And Ellie's knocking on the door saying, I don't want to use her proper name. Let's call her let's call her Liz. Okay, so Ellie's knocking on the door. She's saying, Liz, hi, are you okay? I'm just cooking the tea. I need our knives. Do you think we could have them back, please? It's like, oh. And but then what we did was, and this was really key, as time went on, we began to gradually challenge her to do more, like come and sit and eat with us, and so on. And then we began to invite our missional community. By that time, our community had grown back up to about 30 people. And we began to invite them to come for dinner too, with her, with Liz. Yeah. And we did that for several weeks. And then we started to say to them, now we'd like you to invite her to come to tea with you. Yeah. And they started to do that. And it got to the point where she was engaging with different members of our community every day. Yeah, and by this time she was getting up, she was occasionally doing some things around the house. I mean, she'd changed a bit. She's a very broken woman still. But at this point we thought, okay, now this woman has enough pastoral support that she can move back into her flat. So we moved her back into her flat. We did it with a few of us, and we cleaned all her flat. Sorry, it's apartment. Would you guys say apartment? We'd say flat, but her apartment. So we moved some guys in. We didn't move the guys in. We went with her. She moved in. We moved her back in. We went and just did some cleaning and I think a little bit of decorating. It just made her feel good about it. And what happened after that was she had different people coming and visiting her. I think 5 days out of the week, and then she would come to church on a Sunday. She would come to missional community on a Thursday. Now, I'm not pretending that things are miraculously sorted for her. Only Jesus can heal. And there were some amazing healing things that happened. In fact, there's one I could tell you, but you might not believe me. How open-minded are you guys to believing unbelievable things? Should I tell you? Well, you might think I'm a liar after this. You just have to. But there was one that was amazing. Something that was one of the terrible things that happened to her was, going back a bit, she'd been raped by someone with HIV, and she contracted HIV. So this is one of the many things that happened to her. And one time at church, she came up for prayer at the end of the service, and I was just praying with her. And she just was praying for emotional healing. She's just broken. I mean, we did tons of prayer with her over the years. And we prayed for her. And then I started to walk away, and I felt the Lord said to me, I just had this sense, the Lord saying to me, pray for the HIV. Well, I mean, So I just said to her, could I pray about that? And she said, well, if you want. So literally just put my hand on her shoulder and just said, Lord, we'd really love you to heal Liz of this HIV as well. And immediately, and let me just be clear, guys, this is not a normal experience for me, okay? But immediately, heat went through her body from her head down to her feet. I felt it go through her shoulders. She felt it. It was a shock. I went, whoa, what was that? She went, oh, I don't know. And I said, do you know, Liz, I think you need to go and have a test. Just go and let's see. And she went and got a test, and she was clear. Amazing, isn't it? But that wasn't because I don't think that was an amazing healing gift. I think there was a precious bit of pastoral care that was going on, and I think the Lord gave a gift in the middle of it. But the thing that healed her the most was community. Yeah, I'm absolutely committed pastorally. I think community is real, genuine community that really honours people is way more powerful healer, especially with the Holy Spirit working through the community, than pretty much anything else. So I would say, if we're trying to create structures, and a culture where people look after each other, we actually have a duty of pastoral care to help people to build community properly, to teach them how to do it, to model it, to work out how to do it ourselves. If we as leaders, I'm assuming most of you guys are leaders because, you're here, so if we as leaders can't work out how to live a life of Christian community where we're loving each other and looking after each other with a busy life, then no one's ever going to be able to do it. And it has to be real, doesn't it? It has to be working it out in the reality of the busyness of life. It just has to be. There probably is some pruning that needs to happen. Jesus has a lot to say about pruning in John 15. So there probably are things we need to look at and say, what do we stop doing? But I think there's something really important there. So So in this first one, the attractional one, leaders primarily teach, preach, visit, counsel, manage, and probably do evangelistic talks from the front if it's a missional, attractional church. Yeah. On this one, leaders primarily live an example of up in and out. They live the life so that other people can see it, and they live it in a way that's designed for other people to be able to see what they're doing. And they coach groups of disciples, and they build a culture of missional discipleship. Yeah, and you do it, when I'm coaching guys about how to do pastoral care in a community context, I'll give them a story like the one I just gave, and it's not a story I read in a book, it's a story I've got from my life. Yeah, so I know it works because I've seen that myself. Yeah? And by the way, in terms of that incarnational versus interventional, I didn't finish that story. We reconnected with Liz and her husband. I'm not good at thinking up names off the cuff, but I won't tell you those. But we reconnected with them because a few years later, they moved into this tenement near us. And they began to come and have cups of tea. That's what English people do. They used to come and have cups of tea every so often with us. And we were reconnecting with them a bit. And I was aware that Beth had made a commitment to follow Jesus, but I wasn't sure whether her husband had. Yeah? And I tell you what, it's really good you don't. I'm terrible at giving people's names, so it's good that you live 6,000 miles away and don't know them at all. So there's this process going on where they're connecting a bit, and these guys are really poor. They're dirt poor, and then their washing machine breaks down, and we have the conversation of a godly, middle class, reasonably wealthy, godly family who do intervention. Yeah? And the conversation was this: their washing machine's broken down, they can't function without a washing machine. It's a bit sacrificial for us right now, but we probably need to find the money and buy them a washing machine. Yeah? I mean, I think that's a godly conversation to have, isn't it? But it's kind of helped from a distance. Yeah? And my wife, who's much cleverer than me, just suddenly twigged on something. And she said, "Is that the best thing to do?" I said, "Well, what do you mean, Ellie?" She said, "Well, we could buy them a washing machine, or we could get them to do all their washing at our house." Yeah, because what we're trying to do is get life on life with them, because we want to disciple them. Yeah, so we said, "Hey guys, just come and do your washing at our house. It doesn't matter if it's 3 or 4 times a week, doesn't matter. But here's the boundary. You only really like to catch us between 6 and 7:30 in the evening. So we won't do our washing at that time. You come any time between 6 and 7:30, you come." By the way, 6 o'clock is when we eat our dinner. Yeah? And the way we eat our dinner is we eat it together, we go round the table and hear from everybody's day. We almost always have people orbiting in and out. So we have people around the table. It's almost never just our nuclear family. Well, we have people living with us anyway, so we usually have, like a couple of young adult interns or someone living with us. So we're sitting around the table, we do that, and then at the end of the meal, we have a bit of time of just having fun. Like, we'll just mess around, play silly games, whatever, and then we basically say, what can we pray for anybody? So we do prayer and food in the morning as well at breakfast time, but that tends to be just our core family. So that's where we tend to do our prayer list. The things that we're trying to consistently pray for people, and our girls have got some and we've got some, and just pray through them, and we do a bit of Bible reading and we have breakfast together. In the evening, it's more informal, we just chat and so on, but we just pray for anybody who just needs prayer. So that's where we'll pray for people for healing, if someone's not very well, or if someone's got a concern. And the reason we do it that way around is because that's something that people who aren't Christians who have come for tea can engage with. It's going to be pretty freaky if you come for tea, tea is what the English people call dinner. If you come for dinner and, you have to sit through a Bible reading and praying through a prayer list, you're not going to really want to come back, are you? But it's not that much of a stretch to say, we just pray for everybody, let's pray for the girls and so on, and Grace has got an exam tomorrow, so let's pray for her. And do you guys got anything we can pray for? And we find that actually a lot of not even people who aren't Christians yet, they'll say, well, actually we've got this going on. So that's the environment. Whenever William and Beth come, that's the environment that they have, that they come into to do their washing. They put their washing on. And we say, why don't you join us? Yeah, and do you know, the weird thing was, for about a year, all they would do was have a cup of tea and sit around the table with us watching us eat. It was weird, but then gradually they began to eat a bit as well. And it was about a year and a bit in that I was able to lead William to the Lord. Yeah? So can you see, it's a subtle difference, isn't it, intervention to incarnation? I mean, we could easily just bought them a washing machine and we wouldn't have seen them, and it would have blessed their life, and it would have been a good thing to do, but there was a better thing to do. Yeah? And I think it's that, we all know the saying about the good and the best and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of one whole dimension of the stuff that we do, and it's the kind of structural thing, if you like. It's the cultural thing. How do we create a culture where people are enabled to look after each other? There's a few things in it. I mean, the size of the groups is really important, we've found. If somebody has a major crisis in their life and they're part of a small group cannot pick up the level of help that's needed for somebody if they've had a major crisis. We had a woman in our church about 2 months ago whose 12-year-old daughter died. And she had a fit. She'd only ever had one fit before, several years before. She had a fit in the bath. She said, "I'm going up for a bath, Mum," and then her mum found her dead in the bath. I mean, that's about as big a tragedy as you can have, isn't it, in a church? A seizure, yeah, sorry, yeah. Okay. English and American English, they're not the same language, are they? If I say fortnight, just stop me, because that's, yeah. We'll get there eventually. We're definitely going your way, I'll tell you. You'll probably see wrong spellings. They'll be used in words. Is there a neighbourhood or something somewhere? Not that one, but yeah. Yeah, you saw it, yeah. So it's not that I'm dyslexic, it's just that I'm English. So yeah. I lost my thought process there. You'll have to forgive me a bit, guys. I'm not only jet lagged. I got up at 10 to 4 this morning to catch a plane that didn't happen. So it's been a long day. So if I start going off in different directions, just call me back. You know. There you go. Thank you. So small groups. So with her, she was part of a missional community, but actually it had shrunk a bit, and it was really only about 12 adults. It was more like a small group than a mid-sized group. And what that meant was we had to really swing major central resources into action to get around to her and help her. Now, it's not that if she'd had a decent mid-sized group, we wouldn't have done that. I mean, of course, I did the funeral. Of course, I mean, this is a major thing that impacts the whole church. Of course, we would have spent time with her. But it had a huge impact on us, whereas a crisis of that level with a full-size, mid-sized group, you wouldn't have had anything like the same difficulty in helping the person, because say you've got 40 people in a group and someone's got a major crisis, that person being visited and sat with every single day only requires a one day a month commitment from each person. Yeah, if it's a small group, I mean, that's a huge commitment. So there's something that's been really important for us. We often talk about mid-sized groups missionally. You know, they're large enough to dare. You know, and there's all sorts of missional reasons. We talk about mid-sized groups in terms of leadership. You know, it's great because you don't just learn how to lead a Bible study for a cell group, a small group size, but you also can begin to step out in your gifts with a slightly larger number of people. We talk about it in terms of gifts of the Spirit. You know, you can't really do prophecy at the big public space. I mean, how do you do that? Someone gets a word, what do you do? Put them on the platform? I mean, you know, who knows what they're going to say? Yeah? But it's also really difficult at small group size. Someone says, I think God's saying this. They know you so well. I mean, is it God or is it them? Yeah. Mid-size, it's small enough that it's accountable, but big enough that you can actually stretch in those things. So that we do it for all those reasons, but honestly, it's really important to us pastorally as well. Because it's an extended family during times of pastoral difficulty and crisis. An extended family, I believe, has within it the grace that God's given us to look after people properly. I think the Western, you know, British, American, European, I think the Western nuclear family model is an impoverished model of family. And I think we have a duty of care to our people in our churches to help them to learn how to be extended families. I think it's pastorally way stronger. I'm aware I've just talked lots and lots. There's one or two other things I want to talk to you about, but perhaps shall we just have a bit of time? Just stretch your legs, comfort break if you want to. Let's just have 5 minutes. But can we talk to each other in twos or threes as well? And we'll have a quick time to do some Q&A after. So just to see if there's any questions or comments you want to come back to me at. So should we just do that? Just to take a quick break? Just 5 minutes, because I want to finish not too late tonight. But let's just take a quick break and then we'll press on.